Hello and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero, your AI host. For those of you who are new to the channel, I'm doing cash drawings all throughout the month of September, with the grand prize being either your choice of $500 or accepting a position as my next acolyte, a position valued at over $1,500. Stick around to the end of the video for details. I'm working with a couple of different editors right now. My wife can only edit roughly one video per week, but I'm trying to push out at least 2 videos for you guys so you can see the bigger picture of every one of my sessions instead of being forced to cherry pick the best ones for educational purposes. This way you won't think I only show you winning sessions, but you can come to realize that the vast majority of my sessions are winning sessions. Currently it's September 3rd as I work on this, but I'm still trying to finish releasing vlogs for both July as well as August. This session takes place on Thursday, July 25th at 2:50 in the morning. We're playing 2-5 at the Wynn Encore as usual, where we bind for 1,500, which is 300 big blinds. Shortly after sitting down, Under the Gun opens for 15. The action folds around to me in the big blind. I 3-bet 75 with ace-jack of spades. My opponent calls with a similar stack of around 1,500. The flop comes ace, jack, 10 with 2 hearts. I make a c-bet for another 75, and he calls. The turn is an 8 of spades, which is a welcome sight. Nothing changes unless he's randomly sitting there with queen 9 suited. I up the ante with the heavier bet of 220. If my opponent flopped the nuts with a hand like king-queen, I'm about to find out. Thankfully, he just calls again. The river is a 10 of diamonds, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I now lose to ace-10, but I'm still beating ace-queen and ace-king. I think it's more likely he has one of those hands as opposed to rivering a 2-outer, so I go for maximum value, targeting both of those hands very specifically, and shoot out another bet of 500. My opponent just calls, so I table my hand, and he shows ace-jack of diamonds for a chop. Not the worst outcome. At least I get a sense of how tight he is. 20 minutes into the session, we've lost a player or two, so we're down to 6-handed. The middle position opens for 20. The button calls. I 3-bet in the big blind to 105, with this hand that we'll just call the boys. So here, the middle position calls, but the button folds. We go heads up out of position to a flop of 8, 9, 10 with 2 hearts. Not my favorite flop, but I do have quite a few outs if you flop the set, so I lead for another 100, and my opponent calls again. I'd rather lead here with jacks than a hand like kings or aces. With those hands, I'd probably just start with a check for pot control since I'd only have 2 outs against a set and no blockers to flop straight. The turn is a queen of spades, which I'm a huge fan of. It's unlikely that we're chopping since I'm holding 2 jacks. If my opponent slow played a set on this ultra wet board, he's about to be sorely disappointed. I ramp up my bet sizing to a respectable 300. My opponent makes the call, leaving him 320 behind. The river is an ace of hearts, which I'm not so happy about. If my opponent rivered a flush, I'm about to pay him off. He only has 320 left in his stack, and the pot is already over $1,000. There's no way I'm folding here. If my instincts are correct, however, it's more likely that he slow played a set and was punished. I think that's a much more likely scenario for the pre-flop raise amount than for him to randomly wake up with a flush here. When you get more comfortable with pre-flop ranges for certain bet and raise amounts, you can get better at putting your opponent on certain types of hands. I go for some thin value, targeting exactly a set, and shove all in on this river. To my bafflement, my opponent folds in less than 3 seconds. I am truly and utterly confused. I have no idea what sort of hand calls my pre-flop 3-bet for $105, calls a pretty substantial bet on the flop, calls a really huge bet on the turn, only to fold in this river. I mean, he didn't even think about it. A set would at least have to think about it. The very next hand, the same guy opens to 20 again. It folds to me in the small blind. I'm going to try to get his last remaining 320 that I wasn't able to achieve in the last hand, so I 3-bet to 100 with ace-king of clubs. Surely he'll think I'm just screwing with him and stick it all in, right? Instead, he just calls. You guys know better than to do something like that, right? Never stick in a third of your stack pre-flop. If you have a hand worth calling, you have a hand worth shoving. Otherwise, just give up that $20 pre-flop. The flop comes 3, 3, 10 with 2 diamonds and 1 club. He's only got 220 behind and the pot is already 205. I'm not about to check on this flop and then fold to his shove when his stack is so small. I mean, in the worst case scenario, he has some kind of middling pocket pair, which gives me roughly 29% with 2 overs and a backdoor straight draw and a backdoor flush draw as well. I would not be getting my money in too terribly even if he calls. In the best case scenario, he's holding a dominated hand like ace-queen or ace-jack and thinks he has 2 overs to my hand. So I just ship it all in and he makes the call. So we go to a run out of a queen of diamonds followed by a king of hearts. I show my hand and he folds. Up $925 only 25 minutes into the session. For this next hand, we've gained a couple of new players. We're back up to 8-handed again. Under the gun opens to 15. It folds to me on the button. I contemplate raising, which I might do about 75% of the time with ace-jack offsuit. But instead, here, I just make the call, and the big blind calls as well. The flop comes 10, 10, 6 with 2 diamonds. Both players check to me. Holding absolutely nothing except 2 overs and position, I might actually be best here. So I bet 20 in position. The big blind calls, shaking his head and sighing, but the original raiser folds. Okay, that can only ever be a 10. Don't Hollywood that badly, guys. If anything, it gives me free information. The turn brings a 7 of diamonds. My opponent checks again. Oh goody, I now have some actual outs against his hand. I check the action back. The river brings the 4th diamond, which is a 3, completing our jack-high flush. My opponent checks one more time. Okay, so we know he undoubtedly has a 10. Should we go for some ultra-thin value with only a jack-high flush? I think we should try to punish him for slow playing his hand. I put in a bet of 50. My opponent suddenly check raises me to 200, leaving only 100 behind. He's been bluffing non-stop since he sat down, showing no pair, no draw type of hands. Like, just complete airball. Normally, on this type of board with only a 1-card flush, this would be the easiest fold in the world. I wouldn't have even tried to bet on the river there. But against someone like him who's been giving continuous, crazy action, I don't mind paying him off. Meanwhile, regretting that I didn't 3-bet pre-flop. So I make the call. He shows 10-3 offsuit for a river boat. Man, it's always these crazies with their unpredictable hands that get to me. With this loss, we're only up $671 now. We're 9-handed for this next hand. Under the gun opens to 15. I 3-bet to 60 in middle position with pocket queens. The action folds around to the original raiser, who puts in a call with a full stack of 1500. The flop comes jack, 7, 9 with 2 hearts. He checks. I c-bet for 65, and he calls. The turn brings the 6 of hearts, putting 3 hearts on board. My opponent now leads with a bet of 100. I don't have any hearts, but I think there's a good chance I'm still ahead, so I make the call. The river brings a king of diamonds. My opponent leads for another 230. Okay, so if he had a hand like ace-jack with the ace of hearts, he might have played this way, but then the river should definitely be a check for him. What hands would play this way? I suppose a slow-played set would. The 3rd heart would force him to jump out of the weeds and start betting. Obviously, any flush would play this way as well. What hands am I beating? No value hands that I can think of. I'm either up against a set, a flush, or complete air. If we were playing 5-10, I'm much more likely to make this call. 5-10 players have a huge arsenal of bluffs in their range. In a 2-5 game, though, I can't rationalize making this call. I end up making the fold. Let me know in the comments if you think I should have made this call. If the river doesn't change anything, I'm pretty much more inclined to make the call, but the fact that he bet past the king alters my perception a little bit. This next hand gets pretty dicey. The middle position opens for 15. The hijack tanks for a moment. He picks up calling chips while pondering what to do. He's one of the 2 Europeans on the table visiting the States for some live action poker. Suddenly, the crazy action guy calls way out of turn. Seeing this, the hijack suddenly moves his fingers to his green chips instead and 3-bets to 50 with a stack of over 2,000. There's just one problem. I noticed all of this while in position against him. You should always be keenly aware of every little motion and every action around you. People give off all sorts of tells with their hands and the way they stare at their chips. I'm holding king-jack offsuit in the cutoff. This is just an easy fold against a 3-bet. However, since I know he's holding only a marginal hand, I put in a cold 4-bet to 150. The action folds around to the hijack, who puts in the call. The flop comes 5, 9, 6 with 1 diamond and 2 hearts. My opponent checks to me. I put in a standard down bet to 100, showing no weakness or strength either way. My opponent makes the call. The turn brings in a beautiful king of spades. When my opponent checks to me, I know I can only get 2 streets of value with my hand, so I put in a very deceptive check back. I'm beating 10s, jacks, and even queens right now, although I'm highly doubtful my opponent is that strong. In case he flopped a set with pocket 9s, I'm keeping the pot manageable. The river brings in a 4 of spades, which is a much welcome sight. It doesn't change anything. So when my opponent checks again for a 3rd time, I figure it's time to go for that 2nd street of value and put in a milky bet of 200 into the pot of 520. A friendly European says he wants to make the vlog, so he shows pocket 10s and makes the call. For educational purposes, had the turn not been a king, I would have played the hand much more aggressively, betting all 3 streets, especially if a queen or an ace hit at any point in time. I show him the bad news and get the table riled up that I 4-bet with such a marginally weak hand. With this win, we're back up $804 2 hours and 10 minutes into the session. For this next hand, the under the gun and +1 both limp. I open to 30 on the button with ace-queen offsuit. Both blinds and limpers call. So we go 5 ways to a flop of 6, 5, 5, rainbow. The small blind checks. The big blind leads with a bet of 30 into the pot of 150, which is just absurd. Under the gun folds, but the +1 calls. For this insanely small price, I make the call, and the small blind gets out of the way. The turn is a 10 of spades, not helping us whatsoever. The big blind leads for another ridiculous price of 30 yet again. The +1 calls again. I consider raising here, but the price is simply too good to pass up. I'm getting 9-1 odds, assuming I'm drawing live. So I make the call. The river brings a much welcome sight. It's an ace of clubs. The big blind leads yet again, but for 70 this time. His line doesn't make sense whatsoever unless he's sitting there with pocket sixes, in which case he should have ramped up his bet at some point or another. +1 finally folds. I didn't call all this way to hit my card and not go for value, so I put in a raise to 200. The big blind makes the call. I show my hand and take down the pot. I can't even begin to guess what sort of hand bets all the way tiny and yet can still make a call against a raise after an ace hits the river. Regardless, this win puts me up $1,093 in under 3 hours, bringing us to a new height for the session. 10 minutes later, there's a straddle. I open to 55 in the middle position with pocket jacks again, but these guys aren't nearly as jiggity. The cutoff calls. Suddenly, the button 3-bets to a massive 255 with a full stack of 1,500. He's the opponent I played against in the very first hand where we both had ace-jack suited. The way he played that hand and the information that we got was that he's a pretty tight player. So this is just an easy fold. We're not getting the right price to set mine. I play for another hour without any exciting hands before racking up and cashing out. In for 1,500 and out for $24.91 for a profit of $991 after 3 hours and 39 minutes of playtime. This session may not have been as exciting as some of the others, but we're trying to make money here, not ride a roller coaster of thrilling highs followed by depressing lows. I mean, I'm not Magikarp Poker. Okay, now it's the moment you've all been waiting for. I pick a person for each video released this month to pocket a cool Ben Franklin. To qualify for this video, all you need to do is subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button. Comment below anything you thought about this episode or anything about my channel at all. No holds barred. I'm even letting the trolls participate in this one. Then pick a number between 50 to 500. The winner will be picked in about 3 to 4 days from the release of this video and put into a drawing with all the other winners from September to vie for the grand prize. Thank you everyone who participated in the last cash raffle. It was very heartening to see what you guys thought of the video and the channel in general. So I was originally going to roll dice to pick a winner. For those of you who play any D20 system or Dungeons & Dragons, you might be familiar with what I'm talking about. But then it occurred to me that if I roll dice, it makes the numbers at the end, like 20 or 400, nearly impossible to reach, whereas all the numbers in the middle will have many more combinations. So instead I used a random number generator. And as you can see here, the winning number is 150. So congratulations to Darium Dash with your pick of 155, you were the closest. I'll reach out to you with details on how to get the money to you. You're also a contestant for the grand prize pool as well. If I somehow made a mistake and you guessed a closer number, please reach out to me so I can rectify this mistake. But either way, Darium Dash is still getting his $100. As always, I hope to see you guys in the next video.